So welcome, Jackie Roberge. It's a treat to have you here with us. And we're welcoming you in the context of what we're calling deliberately developmental organizations. So for the sake of this recording, we'll call it DDO for short. So pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you.
And I would love to just hear your story, Jackie, as to why is this subject of interest for you, and that allows us to maybe cover a bit of your bio on what led you to have a particular interest in this notion of DDO, which we'll deep dive into in a minute.
Yes, so I guess where my own kind of personal development journey started was about 27 years ago. I was in marketing. I was exhausted, stressed, back-to-back colds, really run down. And I made a decision at that point to do something about it. And that decision was to learn to meditate. And I took the Transcendental Meditation course. And they teach you a technique and they say do it 20 minutes twice a day. So I listened. I paid $1,000 for the course. So I did my homework. And it made such a big impact in my life. Immediately, I felt more energy. Within probably a month, I felt much healthier. And ever since, I haven't been getting colds. I don't get sick. It really made a big impact on my physical well-being. And then with time, I noticed that the daily meditations helped me see stress differently. It was still there, but there was like some distance between myself and the stressors. And I was able to become more the observer and decide how I wanted to respond instead of reacting to situations. And again, with time, became more patient with myself, with others, more compassionate. And actually, right after that, I got very into yoga and decided to become a yoga certified yoga instructor. And that's really where I plunged into mindfulness and became passionate about that as a practice. So that's kind of the beginnings of it. And then eventually my marketing background led me to bring mindfulness to organizations because finally, recently, organizations have been open to the power of mindfulness and meditation.
Now, we'll be talking about being deliberately developmental, and just from what I'm hearing there, is being quite deliberately developmental. So you really got on this path of personal development that led you to what you're doing today. And my understanding is that that notion of being deliberately developmental, getting that what we're calling vertical growth, vertical alignment, has been your passion for quite a few decades here. And do you mind telling us how this morphed into that particular interest to maybe how could I say, give it a structure of what we're calling being deliberately developmental? Do you want to tell us a bit more on how you brought that component into your own development work?
Yeah, I guess I've been doing it on my own for the last 27 years, and just through courses, through reading, through, I guess, what you could say, not extracurricular, but outside of the normal work environment, I was working on myself. And what I found when I discovered DDO through a white paper was that there was an opportunity to make the workplace the place where we were working on ourselves. And that to me just lit me up. It was like, oh, that is so cool that now organizations are seeing the benefit of having their people work on themselves. And that's kind of basically one of the premises of it is that human flourishing, when people are flourishing both personally and professionally, then organizations flourish.
So what?
So
Sorry, I didn't want to
yeah.
cut you off. Okay, so why don't you, because I've been bringing up this word, or this acronym DDO. Before we go further into it, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what is DDO for those who are maybe being introduced to the actual acronym and the notion of being deliberately developmental organizations?
Yeah, so it is all about helping people on a day-to-day basis get in touch with their own limitations, weaknesses, challenges, and be supported through those in order to make changes and grow and develop really, like I said, on a daily basis. And that's what's so exciting about it. So one of the premises behind it is that a lot of us have two jobs. one, it's our regular duties and roles and responsibilities, and the other is managing our image and how we show up and trying to please people and trying to look good. And that's actually exhausting and very time consuming. And I want to share a quote from the white paper by Keegan and LaHaye. And they say that there's no greater waste of resources in an ordinary organization than the energy spent to hide our weaknesses and manage other people's favorable impressions of us. So if you think about taking away that second job and substituting it with, I'm working on myself to grow and to accept my weaknesses and actually leverage them into growth opportunities, then it's a whole new shift, a new way of looking at things. And that's the way DDOs look at the opportunity to help people flourish. So that's one big premise. The other is that to be able to grow personally and evolve, that's a huge motivator for people. So they are showing up excited to learn and grow. And once we feel like we're learning and growing, we want to contribute. So it kind of leads us to, a more purposeful role that we're bringing into the organization. So the other thing, this notion of continuous development, as you know, because you're a psychologist and have studied neuroscience, the typical approach was that we were growing and our brain was changing and developing until early adulthood. And now we know that, no, we can continue, can teach an old dog new tricks. We can continue to learn and grow. And that's really a big part of helping people get in touch with what's been holding them back and shifting their patterns, developing new habits in order to move forward in new directions at any point in our career. Even when we think I am the way I am and this is how I lead, no, it's not too late.
This is really exciting. There's a few links I'm making.
Mm.
One, this is directly linked to what, a very popular term these days around psychological safety. One of the important components of psychological safety is that idea that I'm in an environment where I could continually grow. So this is I'm seeing this as a very important contributor to that, to creating that psychologically safe environment. And it's very much aligned with what we're talking about, vertical growth. What I'm hearing in what you're saying is that it's not just about learning stuff. When I say what we're calling horizontal competencies, it's about deep diving into yourself. It's about really learning to go beyond image management, as you mentioned, requires a fair amount of self-observation and to some extent being, open to looking at some uncomfortable things about ourselves. So that I'm hearing there's quite a bit of depth in where this is going. It's not superficial learning. It's deep learning about oneself. Is that a correct understanding?
That is very correct. And in order to do that, people have to be willing to be vulnerable. And as you mentioned, that takes a psychologically safe environment. So that's kind of like the foundation. The DDO cannot work if it doesn't have that foundation of psychological support to hold people in a safe space.
So I had a question for you, but I feel we've answered part of it, but I'm trying to see how does this DDO relate to an organization which is putting emphasis on well-being and this notion of vertical growth I just talked about. I think we've answered part of it, but do you want to sort of pull that together on how DDO is linked to overall psychological well-being in an organization and vertical growth?
Well, what DDO allows for is for contextual feedback. So when people are on the job and getting feedback in the moment, Carl, I just noticed you were defensive when we brought up this point about the meeting. Oh, okay, isn't that interesting? So it brings self-awareness to the forefront and really allows people in action to have somebody point out what we don't see about ourselves, our shadows, our blind spots, and to have it right there in front of us so that we can explore it. And that's the other part about the DDO is that you want to have people that are able to point things out, but also help that person go deeper. So it's not just, Carl, you got defensive. You shouldn't get defensive. I'm curious, why would you get defensive in this situation? What belief is behind that? And where did that belief come from, and really to go deeper, like you say, in exploring.
So what I'm hearing here is a difference from, it's a posture of being of service rather than being in a place where we're trying to fill gaps and we're trying to, sometimes we could get in a judgmental type of posture. This does not appear to be in that language or that posture at all.
No, there's a mantra that I like, better me, better you, better us. So if I'm helping, I want to be developing myself, working on myself, but I also want you as part of my team or part of the organization to get as much development as you can. So I'm not going to be, pointing fingers and judging you. I'm going to be pointing out what might be helpful for you with the intention of growth and support coming with that. And then better me, better you, better us. It's like the whole environment can flourish if we're all doing that for each other.
That's wonderful. Why don't we look a bit, look at what does that development look like in a DDO? So what's different in terms of developmental strategies or approaches that qualify DDO versus maybe what's always been done in organizations?
Yeah, so some of the typical things that we see that are very helpful, for instance, leadership programs. It can be a week-long program, it can be retreats, you're going off-site, whatever that might be. That is great in terms of a certain percentage of the population of the company, but it is limited. And it's also limited in the sense that it's an in and out. You're going and you're learning, and then you're going back to your own context, and then you have to make that link between what you learned and what you're living on a daily basis. So in contrast with DDO, what they want to do is bring that learning not only to a certain portion of a leadership team or people that are getting executive coaching, or even virtual seminars for people that maybe everybody can go there, but there's not much depth. What the idea is to bring that learning into everyday interactions. So each day is an opportunity, each meeting, each presentation is an opportunity for someone to give you feedback, for the group to make comments, so it's contextual, so it's right, it's live, it's real time, ideally, or if it's a presentation, after the presentation, it's everyone in the organization. So there's no, just upper management, just these people. It's the entire organization that is invited to not only be, to receive feedback, but to give feedback. So any level of the organization can give feedback to anyone else. And it's really exciting in that way, because it becomes constant and very inclusive and very contextual and relevant in the moment. When I'm pointing something out, then you really know, okay, it's not 2 months later at an evaluation or a quarterly review that you kind of think, no, how did I feel in that moment? No, it's like that day you get to reflect on it.
And that's really cool, because we know that most training programs typically don't deliver on what we want them to deliver on, because there's a gap between what they've learned and what they're doing. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is we're bringing the classroom into the actual work.
Yes.
And it's action learning as a privileged way of going forward. So I see that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add around maybe what does that look like in an organization? So what I'm hearing is already the notion of providing feedback, live feedback, which in itself, I imagine people need to be, need to be trained, lack of better words, need to be educated in some shape or form to be able to give that feedback in constructive, compassionate way. Where typically people don't give feedback because they're afraid of hurting the other person. They're afraid of not doing it well, or being judgmental, etc. So I imagine there's a whole culture shift that needs to occur around feedback and how to give feedback and how to receive feedback. So what anything else to add on how does that actually pan out in the organization?
Yes, so there are, I guess, a necessary requirement of DDO is that there are structures in place to make sure that the feedback happens. And that can be, as I mentioned, after a presentation, there's a 10-minute huddle and the presenter gets feedback from everybody. And that becomes a practice that every time you book a presentation, you book 10 minutes after. It's just that becomes the structure around giving feedback on presentations. There's also opportunity to actually create, okay, this person is developing their ability to lead a meeting. Okay, let's have that person lead this team meeting tomorrow. So you're creating environments where they're not necessarily, leading a client meeting, but they're leading an internal team meeting. So giving them that opportunity to practice the skills and then again, get the feedback. There's also things like learning logs and working, they call them talking partners that you can set up. And that's even daily meetings with your talking partner. And how did the day go? What am I been working on? What's my intention? Challenging the other person, listening to their feedback. So it really requires structure because, as you know, everybody gets too busy and then we forget about these things. They become the nice to have. So it really has to be part of the practices and structures of the organization for it to really have the meaning and depth that it's meant to have.
That makes a lot of sense because there's one thing to have intent. So we could be stating that, we're deliberately developmental. This is what we want to do as an organization. But there's a great thinker called Ken Wilbert who once said, systems drives behaviors. Many elements to behaviors. Mindset obviously is an important contributor, as is culture. But if the systems aren't in place, typically they don't take root because we're sort of fixed in our ways of doing. So what I'm hearing here, it's beyond an intent. It actually gets designed into the organization for the practices to take shape. And how would you qualify the culture that emerges once we've given permission to be deliberately developmental, once we've given people, the knowledge, the training to do it well in a respectful, compassionate way, once we put in systems to drive those behaviors, what are you observing emerges in terms of culture, or if anything, what are we expecting in terms of culture to emerge from that kind of initiative?
Definitely there's an openness, an ability to share and be vulnerable that emerges. And what the result of that are deeper level connections, more meaningful connections. You really feel like instead of your colleague that you see once in a while in meeting and whatnot, you really feel like you start to know that person. And that creates a lot of trust. So people, it's self-fulfilling. So when you get feedback, you get support, you get to know somebody better, you start to trust them. Oh, then you can open up more, you can share even more, go even deeper. So there's a lot of honesty that is necessary. There's some courage. And this whole notion of vulnerability, they just turn it on its head. It's like, instead of, I want to avoid being vulnerable, it becomes, when you can get to that place of vulnerability, you're on your edge, you're on your growth edge, and there's a portal for evolution and learning that you just can't reach when you're in your comfort zone, when you're sitting in that, okay, I'm okay at this, I'm going to stick with this, and not kind of have your blinders on to everything else. So that vulnerability is just, it becomes a really powerful thing that people almost want to get into that state because they know that's when the magic happens.
That's really, again, sounds so cool, because we know that a lot of people, naturally will avoid vulnerability because it's often associated to weakness. It's associated to not being enough. As an author or a TED Talk that I'm sure a lot of people on this that are participating in this have seen, by Brené Brown, on vulnerability. Her studies have shown that vulnerability is actually correlated to courage, not weakness or any other more negative attributes. So we're creating this environment of vulnerability. We're creating this environment of connection among people. We're going along the route of what we're hearing increasingly, which is, people are expecting authenticity in the workplace. People are not, they want to take away the energy that comes with the image management you talked about earlier. Why don't we talk a little bit about how do we actually get this going? Like, what's the structure? What are some of the steps to get a DDO approach moving forward in an organization?
Yeah, they have kind of 4 what they call core elements. First is edge, or the challenging part. The second is home and the support that you get, and the third is really around groove and new practices. So if you think about the edge, that is the invitation to give the feedback in a constructive in a constructive way with a positive intent. And one of the simple ways they share to do that is something called a SBI. So talk about the situation, the behavior, and the impact. So just a quick example, if you were to give me feedback, the situation was, Jackie, in that meeting last week, situation, the behavior, you didn't pay attention to the idea that Mohammed put forth, and the impact, you could say, I felt like I didn't even want to share any ideas because I thought there's no point, and I felt like the whole energy in the meeting just shifted when you didn't even consider his idea. So that's the kind of basic structure of it. But then we're, the invitation is to go into the deeper part. So Jackie, why didn't you consider his idea? You know, and I could say, well, I thought that we already had the best solution, and that we didn't, you know, there wasn't any, I didn't have any time to waste to look at other options. Okay, so what's your belief, you know, behind that? Well, if somebody else has a better idea than I do, then maybe I'm not doing my job. And then, oh, is that true? Well, yeah, in the past, when I haven't been the one leading and giving ideas, then I feel like I've been set aside and I haven't gotten promotions. And then you just keep going and going and trying to get to the heart of why I didn't listen to that idea. Because it's not about Mohammed and the idea, it's about what I'm carrying with me in terms of past patterns and beliefs. So that's where it gets really interesting. And you really, in these organizations, you want to have certain people that are trained to do this, that can be mentor coaches for others, so that everybody becomes skilled at these questions of, well, why? Tell me more about that. Where does that come from? Is that serving you? Is that true? When you have a belief that someone shared, is that true? Is it always true? So that's where it gets interesting.
I could see it's not, you don't just check the box saying I am now DDO. This is a learned skill, because there's both the intention coming in, just the way you described that example. Somebody could go in, but with a judgmental tone to it. I noticed X, Y, Z. But if you're coming in with an intention to help the person grow, that is both felt, I imagine, and we know that's the reason we're going into these conversations. These are growth conversations, not conversation that seek out to sanction or to judge in any way. So I find that really interesting. All right. Anything else to add on?
That's the edge part. The home part is the second part is you want to have an environment, like you said, psychologically safe. Imagine it feels kind of like a family environment where everybody there is just there for you. In any way, the intention is like you say, very pure, and the idea, we talked about the vulnerability and the pain, and we always think pain is to be avoided. I don't want to go there. And the new equation a couple of equations we can play with is pain that we feel when somebody points something out and we don't like that about ourselves, plus reflection equals insights. So, point it out, I feel the pain, then I start to reflect with the questions that people ask me, and then I get an insight. If we want to take it one step further, because just once we have the insight, it doesn't mean that the issue is gone. That's when we want to get into the practices. So if you have the discomfort, the reflection and the insight, and then the practices. So, for me in that example, it might be every time somebody, I feel like I'm cutting off an idea, I'm going to take a few breaths and I'm going to say, okay, what's going on? What am I believing? What am I assuming? And I'm also going to tell everybody on my team, if they see me doing that, please point it out. So it's part of the magic of this is that everybody knows what my blind spot is once it's discovered. And they're all helping me, become aware of it when I'm in situations where I might get triggered.
So it's really it's giving permission to really go much further on how we individually develop and our responsibility in helping others. And I think that's something often we don't give ourselves, is responsibility to support others in their development. in a challenging way. Like it's easy to
Yeah.
give compliments to people, yeah,
Yes.
but it's much more challenging to point out
Yes.
something that's maybe uncomfortable for
Yeah.
both. Mm.
Yeah. So, like you say, it's not only the receiver that feels vulnerable, it's the person giving the feedback that can experience vulnerability. And as we know in our mindfulness teaching, being comfortable with discomfort it's a necessary passage in order to really get into that the growth curve. So teaching people, helping people with that. And the idea with DDO is mistakes are good. So if I give you feedback and it lands the wrong way, that's all good because Jackie's going to learn and we're all going to, whoever is participating in that session of feedback we're all going to learn from that.
Mm.
So there should be, ideally, if it's done well, there should be no pressure to perform because it's all about working, trying new things, experimenting. Okay, is this a good forum for feedback? Is she ready or he ready for this type of feedback? And when you experiment and get the feedback and adjust, I mean, that's the beauty of it. There's no wrong move and there's no mistakes. It's just all learning.
And when I hear there's no pressure to perform, what I'm hearing behind that is it's not a threat-based pressure.
Right.
Because we probably all have pressure to perform, and organizations still need to continue to deliver on whatever their mission is, but it's not done from a fear-based type of environment.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yes.
allows to unleash, I imagine, a much more positive
Mm-hmm.
energy
Mm-hmm.
for the challenge at hand.
Yeah.
Excellent. As we start bringing this to a close, maybe some of the concrete things organizations could do. Yeah, what if people were to start on this journey, what would that look like?
Yeah. So I can share a little bit what we've been doing at Mindsmatter is we have a half hour before our team meetings, and it's just dedicated to DDO practices. So giving feedback, receiving feedback, telling people what we're working on, telling people what we're struggling with, helping each other go through those questions, challenge our limiting beliefs. So just setting, I think that's a great start, is just setting an environment, a time frame within your week or your day to do that is a wonderful start. Things like learning logs, sharing of mistakes. There should be a place somewhere within the company's network where those can be shared. And the idea is that if somebody made a mistake, there's likely a lot of people in the company that could benefit from knowing about that. So it's not like I made a mistake, I'm going to tell just my boss and nobody else needs to know. It's like we want to announce it. We want to broadcast it so that everybody can learn. I already talked a little bit about talking partners. I think that's one of the most powerful is just to put people with a buddy and just say every day, take 10 minutes to say, what are my attention, what intentions, what am I working on, what went well yesterday, what am I, struggling with? And it's an opportunity to support and challenge each other. Because that's really the part of what motivates people is being challenged. And so, we want that as a human, but we also want to feel like, okay, I'm not going to just struggle and stumble and not get there. So that the combination of challenge and support is so important. And then finally, just the coaching, mentoring. So having a kind of even a list of these are the questions that you can ask when somebody's brought up a situation and you kind of don't know how to help explore that with them. Here are the questions that you can ask, some really basic questions, and just give people that so they can use them in their dyads and also in other type of meetings and feedback places.
That's wonderful. Well, this is a great insight, Jackie. I think it puts words to things that some do in some shape or form, but this provides a container, and I think more almost a permission, and if not even a guiding principle on where we want, how we want people to navigate on a daily basis, both within themselves and with the people that are around them. It's giving ourselves permission to support each other, to make sure we're coming in with a growth edge all the time, and creating an environment that stimulates that. So it's super interesting. I really want to thank you for taking the time. I think it fits very well in all of the, I could say, all of the contents we wish to bring to the listeners here. So again, thank you so much for showing up, and may we all continue to develop in the way you're suggesting. And let's hope this makes its way in organizations.
So thank you for allowing me to share what I've learned so far and my passion around being deliberately developmental. So thank you.